The United States Supreme Court has made a decision that they will hear President Trump's travel ban case. This just in.
This is incredibly significant because this has been the biggest legal controversy of President Trump's administration so far. Almost since the moment he signed this executive order, it has been tied up in litigation and it has repeatedly been blocked. Both the first executive order and the second one have repeatedly been blocked by the courts. But here, the Supreme Court has agreed to hear arguments on this case. They have also lifted a lot of the injunction that currently blocks this policy. So it only took 4 justices to agree to hear the case in the fall. We know there are 4 conservative justices on this court. I'm still working my way through this opinion, but this is very significant because the White House believes that they had a pretty good shot at the Supreme Court of convincing the justices that this executive order was within the president's national security powers. So far, those who oppose the travel ban have prevailed in lower courts. They've been able to convince whole panels of judges that this could potentially discriminate based on religion.
I've got Jay Sekulow on the phone, and he is a lawyer, and he knows what he's talking about. So, Jay, straighten me out, please. I'm reading this as a partial win for President Trump on the grounds that some of the restrictions on the travel ban have been lifted. What say you?
It's actually a huge win for the president on the executive order because the only thing they did not put the ban in place for, the travel restrictions for, was a very limited situation with the mother of the U.S. citizen. So it's a very narrow carve-out. But the timing, the procedures, the 90-day, the waiting period, the holdback, all of those have been deemed constitutional. So this is a very significant victory for the White House. This is also a good sign to where the case ultimately goes. Upon full review, the president should be very pleased. This is a very big win.
The U.S. Supreme Court will consider if a Colorado baker discriminated against a same-sex couple by refusing to sell them a wedding cake. Back in 2012, the owner of Masterpiece Cake Shop said he wouldn't make a wedding cake for a same-sex couple because of his religious beliefs. The couple filed a discrimination complaint. Lower courts in Colorado ruled the baker violated the state's public accommodations law. That legislation says businesses open to the public can't deny service to customers based on factors like race, sex, marital status, or sexual orientation. But the baker appealed and argues his decision should be protected under the First Amendment's freedom of speech and religion. The Supreme Court will hear the Masterpiece Cake Shop case when its next term begins in October.
On Monday, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to decide whether the Constitution provides the right to carry a handgun in public, bypassing a major issue about firearm owners' rights simmering across the nation. The court announced it would not look into a California law requiring an individual to show good cause in order to get a permit to carry a concealed weapon. As a practical matter, the law makes it difficult for most individuals to obtain a permit in the state's urban areas. In June of 2016, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that the Second Amendment does not protect in any degree the right to carry concealed firearms in public. The ruling caused outrage among advocates of gun rights, but was celebrated by gun control groups. California currently bans openly carrying firearms in public. A challenge to that law is currently pending in a separate case.
For the first time in over 20 years, the White House skipped out on hosting a Ramadan celebration. Ramadan's a holy month in which Muslims fast from sunup to sunset every day. In 1996, then First Lady Hillary Clinton celebrated the modern White House's first Eid dinner. Since then, presidents made dinners during or to mark the end of Ramadan a yearly tradition. But this year, Ramadan ended without President Donald Trump hosting any event. Instead, Trump issued a statement at the beginning of the holiday wishing Muslims a joyful Ramadan.
The U.S. population is growing older and more diverse than ever before. The nation's median age is 37.9 years old, more than 2 years higher than the median age in 2000, according to new Census Bureau numbers released on June 22nd. The number of Americans over 65 years old has jumped from 35 million at the turn of the century to 49.2 million today. The census reports that across all races and ethnic groups, the non-Hispanic white population grew at the slowest rate, growing less than 0.01% and only gaining about 5,000 people. The Asian American population expanded by 3%. The African American population jumped 1.2%, and the Hispanic population grew by 2%. 7 states lost population between 2015 and 2016.
Well, Girl Boss may be cancelled, but Buckingham Palace has one female who just started taking charge. See her? That's Megan Kudo. She is the first ever female captain of the Queen's Guard at Buckingham Palace. She's 24 and Canadian, and she's taking up the role with her unit, the 2nd Battalion Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. It all happened because a major decided to step aside. Then Kudo took the role. A female officer hasn't had this role before, because until July last year, women were actually banned from ground close combat roles. Kudo says she's excited about the accomplishment.
It's a great pleasure to be considered an equal of my peers, and any one of my peers would be absolutely delighted to be the captain of the guard here, and so I feel equally honored to be given the opportunity regardless of my gender.
Combat roles are now being opened to women over a 3-year period.
UK Prime Minister Theresa May finally has her much-needed government majority. Her Conservative Party reached a deal with Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party, or DUP, on Monday. That's more than 2 weeks after the country's snap election ended with no clear winner. Under the deal, the DUP's 10 lawmakers will back the Conservatives in key votes in the House of Commons, which includes the budget and the Queen's speech. The DUP will also support legislation on national security and Brexit. That's not surprising, since Brexit negotiations were the reason May called for a snap election in the first place. So what does the DUP get in return? Almost $1.3 billion. That's on top of the more than $600 million it was already set to get from the government before the deal. The DUP will spend the total $1.9 billion over the next 2 years on infrastructure, high-speed internet access, and education in Northern Ireland. UK regional leaders were very critical of the deal. One said it was pretty much a, quote, blank check for a Conservative-backed Brexit.
The Migrant Offshore Aid Station says more than 30 migrant boats left Libya for Europe on Sunday, probably because of the end of Ramadan, it says. Sea-Watch says there has never been so many rescued migrants on its ship. More than 300 men were on board, along with 26 women, 4 of whom were pregnant, and 17 children. This Italian police video shows the arrest of 3 suspected people smugglers. They were picked up among 267 migrants who had been transported to the Sicilian port of Pozzallo.
For the 3rd straight day, Israel's Golan Heights region has come under fire as the fighting in Syria is starting to spill across its border. The clashes between pro-Assad troops and rebels, including some linked to al-Qaeda, really has been intensifying in the past few days along the border town of Quneitra. Israelis in the area have seen and heard mortar rounds, and the building, the United Nations outpost building there, is also taken some of the fire, though there have been no reports of injury. As a result of this cross-border violence, the Israeli military has launched a series of strikes in Syria, hitting several Syrian military sites. Regardless of who launches these projectiles from inside Syria, the Israeli government holds the Assad regime responsible. The Syrian state media, though, accuses Israel of supporting extremists because these Israeli strikes tend to help the rebels in that area. Now, the Israeli government has tried to downplay its involvement in the Syrian civil war, but it has regularly launched airstrikes in Syria, and it has also coordinated some military preparedness along its border with the rebels in that area, and given some medical support to rebels in that area as well. But for the most part, Israel is saying that they're trying to stay out of this war, but they're going to defend their border area from any type of involvement from Syrian civil war spillover. That's really what we're seeing in that area. But Israel is very much maintaining a presence along that border and coordinating with rebels in that area. So they're by no means staying completely out of the fighting there.
The battle to take full control of Mosul from the Islamic State is expected to end in a few days. An Iraqi general told Reuters that an attempted fight back by the Islamic militants has failed. The lieutenant general, who commands the counterterrorism service elite units in Mosul, said only a small part remains in the city, specifically the old city. He went on to say, from a military perspective, Daesh Islamic State is finished.
Just 3 weeks ago, walking the streets of Raqqa would have been suicidal for an American TV crew. But now ISIS is losing its grip, besieged by US coalition airstrikes and America's allies on the ground. A ragtag army known as the Syrian Democratic Forces. In more than 3 years under ISIS control, Raqqa became a killing field. American journalists were beheaded nearby. Others were crucified or thrown from buildings. And even now, the extremists are deadly. As part of our team moved forward, they were spotted by an ISIS sniper.
Keep going.
Our producer, Omar Abdulkader, had no choice but to make a run for it.
That was close.
They were safe, but pinned down by at least 2 snipers.
So we are hoping either to get an armored vehicle to take us out from here, or probably when it gets a little bit darker.
But then came word there was a suspected ISIS suicide car bomber nearby. 400 yards away, these fighters told us they'd lost 5 soldiers to one of the bombs the day before.
They're worried that a suicide car bomber is coming towards the point where we were just sitting. So they've asked us to move over here to take cover.
It turned out to be a false alarm. And minutes later, this homemade armour-plated car arrived to ferry our stranded team to safety. A close call with ISIS, even as its so-called Islamic State crumbles.
The U.S. military told us there are still around 2,500 ISIS fighters inside Raqqa, and they are now close to being entirely surrounded.
The U.S. government's agenda in Syria is coming under increasing scrutiny on Capitol Hill. Democratic lawmaker Tulsi Gabbard is attempting to push a controversial bill through Congress that would prevent Washington from arming terrorists and their allies in Syria. Gabbard also visited the war-torn country on a fact-finding mission earlier in the year. However, so far her draft has only attracted the support of 14 other U.S. lawmakers.
We must stop this madness. We must stop arming terrorists. I'm introducing the Stop Arming Terrorists Act today to prohibit taxpayer dollars from being used to support terrorists.
RT asked the U.S. Congresswoman how she views the situation at an anti-terror conference in New York. This was her response.
I and many others are working hard to continue to build support for this legislation with the goal of getting it passed and ending this policy. I think that there has been a concerted effort to, both on the part of some in the media as well as many in politics and many in our foreign policy establishment who have been advocating for a continuance of these regime change wars, really ignoring the fact of what has been the consequence of these wars in countries like Iraq and Libya and Syria, where each time we have waged these wars, it has resulted in the strengthening of terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda or the creation of ISIS, and it has resulted in a tremendous amount of suffering and death from the people in these countries.
Australia has agreed to send 2 surveillance planes to help the Philippine government fight against militant groups. The government confirmed on June 23rd it will accept an offer of 2 AP-3C Orion aircraft from the Royal Australian Air Force to help the armed forces of the Philippines. Presidential spokesman Ernesto Abella said the government welcomed the assistance to stop the Marawi City conflict. Australia Defense Minister Marise Payne said she recently spoke with Philippine Secretary of Defense Delphine Lorenzana about how Australia could help defeat terrorism in the region. The aircraft will be used to help pinpoint locations of Maute militants and other terror groups. Thailand's military government has passed a law to secure supervision over government for the next 20 years. A military junta has ruled Thailand since seizing power in 2014 coup. Elections have been tentatively set for 2018. The military-appointed National Legislative Assembly voted 281-0 to pass the bill on June 22nd. The law sets up a national strategy committee to be made up of military officials and business representatives, among others. The committee will be chaired by current Prime Minister and coup leader Prayut Chan-o-cha. The committee is intended to set plans for national strategy every 5 years for the next 20 years and oversee their implementation. Former Prime Minister Abhisit Wichachiwa criticized the law, telling the Bangkok Post it gives the public little say in the formation of national strategy.
With the Fox News alert right now, 2 U.S. Marines are seriously burned in an explosion while working on a fighter jet. The blast happening on the tarmac at MCAS Miramar in San Diego. Both Marines rushed to the hospital for treatment. They belong to a reserve squadron based out of Texas, but have not yet been identified. The cause of the blast is under investigation.
According to a report of the incident by the Philippine cargo ship's captain, the U.S. warship struck by a container vessel in Japanese waters failed to respond to warning signals. They also failed to take evasive action before the collision that killed 7 of its crew. Multiple U.S. and Japanese investigations are underway into how the guided missile destroyer USS Fitzgerald and the much larger ACX Crystal container ship collided in clear weather south of Tokyo Bay in the early hours of June 17th.
Rocking back and forth as crew members desperately tried to keep the vessel afloat, the tourist boat was carrying about 170 passengers when it got into difficulty in a reservoir in Guatapé in northwestern Colombia. A major rescue operation involving the National Air Force and firefighters was launched, but the boat sank within minutes.
We were with our family when we heard the screams and the noise. You could see the boat was sinking. All you could see was the top of it. All the other boats started heading out, so they could pull people out of the water. Some of the survivors seemed to be in a very bad state. Of course, they were desperate, and they started to climb on top of each other so they could get out.
Truthfully, it was incredible to see all of the survivors start arriving. Everyone pulled together and started to help out. It was such a sad and tragic experience.
Authorities say almost 100 people were rescued and about 40 others managed to make their way back to shore. It's unclear what caused the vessel to sink. Officials have denied reports it was overloaded. Witnesses say many of the passengers weren't wearing life jackets.
Nearly 400 passengers aboard a flight bound for Kuala Lumpur forced to return to an Australian airport when this happened. AirAsia says single engine failure caused the plane to violently shake yesterday mid-flight. The technical issue worrying even the captain, who told the passengers to say a prayer more than once. Tamara, that is not what you want to hear. Thankfully, the plane landed safely in Australia. No reported injuries other than cardiac arrest for several people.
Put this thing down. A University of Delaware professor is out of a job for saying Otto Warmbier, the 22-year-old imprisoned in North Korea, deserved to die. Kathy Detweiler, an adjunct professor of anthropology, wrote on her Facebook page that the American student who was returned to the States in a coma before dying, quote, got exactly what he deserved. She wrote, his parents ultimately are to blame for his growing up thinking he could get away with whatever he wanted. Maybe in the US, where young, white, rich, clueless white males routinely get away with raping women. Not so much in North Korea. And of course, it's Otto's parents who will pay the price for the rest of their lives. North Korea accused Warmbier of stealing a propaganda poster for which he was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor. Detweiler's comments were shared thousands of times, causing the school to cut their ties with her as outrage grew. The University of Delaware values respect and civility, and we are committed to global education and study abroad, they wrote. Therefore, we find these comments particularly distressing and inconsistent with our values. Our sympathies are with the Warmbier family.
Japan is planning to deploy 4 additional Aegis destroyers in the East Sea to better counter North Korea's growing missile threats. The issue is set to be discussed at the U.S.-Japan Security Consultative Committee meeting scheduled for next month in Washington. Tokyo-based Kyodo News Agency reported on Monday that Japan wants to double its current deployment of 4 destroyers to 8. As it's difficult to provide missile defense for all of Japan. The Aegis destroyers are equipped with state-of-the-art radar and ballistic missile defense systems, including missiles interceptors. A number of North Korea missiles have landed in Japan's economic zone, where fishing and cargo ships are active.
ย้ายยาเสพติดให้โทษของกลางทั้งหมด
6 police officers have been injured in London after a protest against police brutality turned violent. 4 people were arrested there.
Police looking for a more inexpensive and accessible body camera now may only have to look as far as their own cell phone. A new app called Copcast allows officers to turn their cell phone into a body camera. The Jersey City Police Department is the first to test the new app in the United States and is expected to provide the new technology to 250 of its officers. All the officers have to do is download the app and strap the phone to their chest. They push the Start Mission button to begin both an audio and video recording. The video can be streamed live by supervisors monitoring the app from police headquarters, and also uses GPS to show the officer's location. Jersey City's mayor, Stephen Fulop, said about the new technology, "All police leadership need to understand that this is the future. The app is an easy and cheap alternative from body cameras already on the market." The executive director of the Police Executive Research Forum says, "If the industry needs anything, it's competition and innovation. We'll be looking to see how this gets rolled out."
Russia has launched another attack on the Telegram messaging app after accusing it on Friday of breaking the law by not handing over encrypted information. Now the FSB, the country's secret service, says terrorists used the chat service to plot atrocities on Russian soil. It describes the service as the most widely used app of its kind. The FSB claims a suicide bomber who blew himself up at St. Petersburg metro station in April had used Telegram to plan the attack in which 15 people died. The app's developers say Russian regulators have asked them to supply the keys to decrypt user messages, but they insist the demand violates Russia's constitutional right to keep correspondence secret.
A wildfire has forced more than 2,000 people to flee homes, campsites and hotels in southwest Spain. The flames have reached the protected zone around a national park famed for its biodiversity, with strong heat and wind hampering efforts to bring it under control. The blaze broke out on Saturday night near Huelva in the Andalusia region and may have been started deliberately, according to Spanish media reports. The mass evacuation came as Spain seeks to avoid the human tragedy seen in neighbouring Portugal, where a forest fire claimed over 60 lives last week. Fears are growing for the Doñana National Park, a UNESCO World Heritage Site that's home to numerous endangered species, including the Iberian lynx and the Spanish imperial eagle.
To help you avoid those hotspots this Friday morning, plus lots of your photos. Put a bit of smoke, smile on your face.
Back to Derek. Let's say he's recovering. He's okay.